original colonies that were set up here in the New World under English rule. And then we got into having a war, a revolutionary war against that control, and started a new government. What that government envisioned was how different it is today. So we're gonna, David, you want to kind of bring that up?
Yeah, I mean, we were, of course, an English colony. The 13 colonies were all English colonies to begin with. We were a very varied group of people, but mainly we were English colonies. We had a colonial representative government here, colonial assemblies, and we all had charters, colonial charters that were given and issued to us by the English. Some worked better than others. There was more freedom in some colonies than there were in others, more religious freedom, more business freedom. And what basically happened was the British fought several world wars. They were involved in trying to colonize India. They were trying to colonize places around the world, and they got into wars. The French, they were in wars with the French, with the Dutch, a lot of other European powers, and they were trying to protect their colonies. When all of these problems started happening, all these wars, they were looking for taxes. And of course, that is the bane of existence. We had been relatively free of British interference up until the 1760s. And then we had our own wars here, the Cherokee Wars, we had Indian Wars, the French and Indian War, and so they started trying to raise more revenue. And by trying to raise that revenue, they started figuring out ways they could tax the colonies. We resented that. We didn't think we were getting anything for our money. And so that just kept building and building. The other thing the English did is they were protecting the Indians, and they would not allow the British settlers to cross and settle on the other side of the Appalachian Mountains, and that rankled quite a few people. So that resulted in that and several other things resulted in the Revolutionary War breaking out. And it started up in New England. They were the guys that really rankled the British, but it wound up coming all the way down here to the south, and South Carolina and Georgia and Virginia and North Carolina all became part of that. We won that war. We won our independence with the help, of course, of the French, without which there would have been no independence. And so then we set up with the Articles of Confederation. It was a very loose government. Didn't have any taxing power to speak of. It was reliant on the largesse of the states. That did not seem to work very well, so they decided they wanted to revise the Articles of Confederation. So we had a convention up in Philadelphia where every colony sent delegates, and the idea was they were supposed to go up there and revise the Articles of Confederation. Instead, they came up with a completely new format, and our Constitution. And it took several years for everybody to be comfortable with it. There were two groups. There were the Federalists that believed that this Constitution would be good and stronger than the Articles of Confederation. And then there were the Anti-Federalists. And they were the folks who just did not like the idea of having a more powerful central government.
So at the time, there was no Republican Party, Democratic Party that we know of today, that we see today.
That's correct. They were the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists. As a matter of fact, George Washington, on his first, I think, or maybe his last farewell speech, said beware of political parties because they cause problems. They will cause factions, and they'll be for themselves and not for the health of the nation.
So can you explain these parties and what their main goal was, or what their main idea was?
Well, there were two groups, and this is not just in America, but it's been historically true worldwide. There are those who believe that a central government, basically an empire-type government, is what is needed. Without that, you're going to have anarchists. You're going to have anarchy. And so they said the only way to prevent anarchy is to have a strong central government. The other side, led by Thomas Jefferson, that was led by Alexander Hamilton. Thomas Jefferson believed the opposite. He believed that the worst thing you can do is put human beings in charge of your freedoms, because humans are human. They have frailties. And as Lord Acton said later on, power corrupts. Absolute power corrupts absolutely. So this is not just an American thing, but it was something that was known worldwide.
Hello, everybody. I'm here with David Lucas, and we're going to talk a little history. First, we want to talk about the book that he brought in. This is one of the books he wrote.
The Rice Kings.
You want to explain him a little bit about what the book's about?
Well, the book is about the early history of the Lucas family. That's my family. It starts off over in 1752 in Whitehaven, Cumbria County in England. First book takes place mainly in England. The end of the first book, the hero in this is Jonathan Lucas, my fourth great-grandfather, and he was shipwrecked here in South Carolina. He was on his way to Antigua, and a hurricane got him blowing here, and then he invented the rice mill and went on to interact with most of the people that we talk about on our history tours down in Charleston. Colonel William Washington, Henry Lawrence, all of these people were clients of his. He built rice mills for them.
And
so it's a story. So far, it's 3 books. I've just started on book number 4.
Okay, so you've got 3 books already.
It gets up to 1808 in the 3rd book, and 1808 forward is what the 4th one will be.
Okay.
One of the things that's interesting today is a lot of people who consider themselves liberals,
right.
You and I consider to be liberals,
right.
They actually recognize some of the same problems that you and I do. The difference is their solution is to give the government more power.
Right. So they want more of a Marxist power
and
have a socialized kind of government, kind of taking care, making everybody, try to make everybody even, which is not.
That's never going to
It's
happen.
because you can. So many people have more incentive to do things, and nothing ever gets done.
It's never worked. It's
right.
been tried thousands
right.
of times throughout history, and it has never worked. And
right.
It has never worked for the same reason. And the main reason is man is basically a very evil in its roots.
I would say you gotta sometimes you gotta dangle a carrot in front of people to actually do something.
Yeah, it's not only that. It's that government grows because people become greedy. People who are in government are greedy.
Right.
And power allows them to accumulate wealth. And so the more wealth they get, the more power they want, the more power they want the government to be able to give them.
Right. But when you have you have libertarians.
Libertarians, that's correct.
That would be kind of the opposite, more closer to the
Jeffersonian side. The Mises Institute, they're the Austrian economists. They believe that the market is self-regulating. And so anyway, going back to the Revolutionary War, after the Revolutionary War, George Washington was our first president, of course. And he was sort of didn't really have an opinion on what the government should do, but Alexander Hamilton, who was his Secretary of the Treasury, Hamilton was a big believer in the mercantile system, and that is what we had under the British.
So this is what we tried to get away from, why we had
That's
a Revolutionary
why we had
War.
the Revolutionary War.
And he's trying to go back to the same kind of government, but run by
Americans instead of the British.
Okay.
And what the mercantile system was is, for instance, Charleston exported rice. We could not ship rice directly to our biggest buyers, which was Northern Europe, Germany. We had to ship it in English ships. It had to be shipped to the Isle of Wight, which is in the English Channel, offloaded and reloaded on the other British ships, and then transported over to the other market. And the English middlemen made the money.
Yeah, so we couldn't directly sell to anybody else. There wasn't a free market. It was you had to go to
So
the
that
government
was the
first.
mercantilist system, and also you couldn't buy goods, you couldn't buy a shovel from France without paying a tariff on it. The British put a tariff on it. It was a protective tariff. They protected the British industry.
So because the British are making shovels, and they don't want to have to compete against other places making a better or cheaper shovel.
A cheaper shovel or a better shovel, or one that's just more convenient.
Okay.
You get it quick. So they were a high tariff, and they directed all that trade from the colonies were directed back to the mother country, England. So that was the English mercantile system, and when we revised the Articles of Confederation, one of the things that was tried to push for by Hamilton and the Federalists was to reinstate that system. They did not call it the mercantilist system, they called it the American system, but it was exactly the same system. And of course, Thomas Jefferson and the anti-federalists believed exactly the opposite. They believed that if you put someone in charge of something and gave him free rein, just like Lord Acton said after the war between the states, power corrupts. Absolute power corrupts absolutely. Crony capitalism. That's what the mercantilist system was all about. It was crony capitalism, and the Jefferson system was all about stopping crony capitalism and they wanted that the Constitution to be changed upon the federal government to keep it from usurping the freedoms and the free market in America. And that worked. Jefferson...
Until what time? When did that stop?
Well, it started... go back to this first president was George Washington. The second president was John Adams. John Adams was also a guy who, in the beginning, believed that free speech. He helped draft the 10 Amendments to the Bill of Rights, which guaranteed free speech. However, he was rankled by some of the criticisms he had, and so he and the legislature, the Congress, passed a law, the Alien and Sedition Act, and it made you up to a 2-year prison term if you criticize the president, the Congress, or the government.
Kind of like Facebook doing right now.
That's exactly right, except this was the government.
Right.
And they actually locked several people up. That was in 1798.
Okay.
And 1800, the election of 1800 was called the Jeffersonian Revolution, because Jefferson said we're going to get rid of the Alien and Sedition Act, and we're also going to ban all inland taxation, which is what they did. So there was no direct taxation from the federal government after Jefferson. That lasted until 1865.
Okay, so the government at the time, what power did they have there in the 1800s? I mean, all the way to 1865.
Very little power. Mainly, what they lived off of tariffs, income tariffs, and some protective tariffs, small amounts, but and land sales. And the only contact most Americans had with the federal government between 1800 and 1865 was when they got their mail.
So did the states have tax at the time?
States also had taxes. They raised income in different manners. Each state did different, had a different way to raise money. But even the states were very frugal. The states did not go out and spend money willy-nilly.
They made sure they had the money before they spent it.
That's correct. We were adverse to debt, and there were a few debts that we got. The War of 1812 cost us money. The Mexican-American War cost money, but it was very manageable. The federal government operated at less than 2% of the national GDP.
So it's not until the Civil War that we actually go in debt.
That's correct.
So
we went, the federal debt in the 1861, I believe, was somewhere in the neighborhood of $58 million total.
Yep, I remember.
After the war between the states, it was 2.6 billion, and it hasn't stopped.
Yes, it hasn't gone up ever since then. Yes.
Yeah.
Real quick, can you explain the different tariffs, what they were?
Yeah, there are two different tariffs. Here in the United States, for instance, this is an income tariff. If we imported coffee, which we didn't grow, and we imported tea, which we didn't grow at the time, they could be put a tax on that, a tariff on that, and it wouldn't matter because nobody here was affected, other than they would have to pay a little higher price. But it didn't favor any one group over another. It didn't favor the coffee growers because they were down in somewhere else.
Right. So
Africa,
this was
Latin America.
kind of like, hey, if you want this luxury,
Correct.
you're going to pay a tax on a luxury that we don't have, we can't make in this country.
And on the other side of the coin, we have a protective tariff, and that is if you made shovels up north, and you were competing against the English, and they were selling shovels 4 or 5 cents cheaper than we could sell them, even after shipping them over here, then they wanted that protected. They wanted a tariff put in place that would equalize the pricing.
Or make it go even higher. And make it cost more even to buy the receipts.
That was the idea,
Yeah.
but of course what they did is they wanted to guarantee profit. And that was another way they could guarantee profit. Because the higher the tariff went, obviously the more you had to pay for that shovel.
Oh, so if it normally would have cost something 20 cents to make or to actually sell, and because you were raising the tariff to buy it overseas for 24 cents instead of 20 cents, now the one that you could buy here in the United States was 20 cents. They could actually raise that to 24 cents.
Or to 30.
Or to 30 cents because it was...
Because the tariff is no competition.
Right, so the tariff is artificially inflating the prices.
And that hurts the consumer.
Right.
And it hurts the competition, and it also hurts the consumer. And the only person that benefits are the people who are getting the benefit of the protection.
So this kind of tariff that was who in the country was hit the hardest by this?
Farmers.
So farmers. So
exporters.
So most of the after the Revolutionary War, most of the farmers don't exist in the North anymore. It's become an industrial age. So pretty much everybody south of Pennsylvania and everybody west of Pennsylvania is mainly affected by these tariffs.
Right.
And so the agriculture places were the most affected by these tariffs. So they're the ones paying most of the taxes.
Yeah, I think the most egregious example I can give you is after the war between the states. During that war, of course, the northern armies tore up our railroads.
Right, and destroyed the cities as they lived.
They tore the tracks up, they destroyed the engines. So after the war, the South had to rebuild its railroads. The tariffs had gone up to 50 to 60%. In the United States, a ton of steel had to pay $80 for a ton.
Right, which would have cost $30 if you bought it from Europe.
Well, if you bought it from England,
right.
they were able to produce steel at $36.
I noticed around there, yes.
So what you're doing is not only are you having to pay more for it, but you're also paying these people who benefited from that a premium.
Right.
That's the age of the robber barons, and how do you think they became robber barons?
So after the Civil War, the South's Confederate money is worthless. A lot of people in the South don't have a lot of money anymore, and the North becomes super wealthy because of taking advantage of having to rebuild the South.
Well, it didn't rebuild itself.
Well, they started to.
What they did is they had those tariffs in places, but they would also do things like they would charge more for shipping north. A company in Wisconsin making plows could ship that plow all the way from Wisconsin to South Carolina. We made plows in Alabama, in Birmingham.
Right.
The steel industry there was very good and very competitive, but they put premiums on shipping from Alabama, so
You had to go up there.
a person from Minnesota or from Wisconsin would send their plows to South Carolina, where we could have bought them a lot cheaper if we'd been able to get them from
Right,
Birmingham.
and we're closer.
But those are the kinds of little tricks that they did to the South during and after Reconstruction. Some of those differences were never were in place all the way up through the 1940s.
Okay. I'm going to stop us there because I do want to get into that, but I want to do that as a different topic.
Yeah, that's a whole.
Yeah, that's Reconstruction is just.